us this morning. As part of the COCC's Season of Nonviolence, the Peace and Justice Committee of Trinity offered to do a book study. And we had a small group this year. Betsy and I did it last year. We did it this year. We had a small group this year, but a really great group of people, as you'll see when we get into this. We have a disclaimer. In an effort to condense the book, we focused on ideas relevant to our Trinity community. We deliberately summarized and paraphrased content without using formal annotation. Our goals while we're here today. While the book focused primarily on people of color and women in educational settings, we found it relevant to our personal histories and daily lives as well. We want to share what we learned and explore with you how we could use it individually and as a parish to enhance our work on racial and social.
We took away from the book, and the first one was that the book taught us that the stereotypes that everybody has about a lot of things, but here it was focused on racial stereotypes and gender stereotypes primarily, have a unique and very long-lasting effect on people who identify as being stereotyped, even if they never encounter what we would commonly see as direct prejudice. For example, having someone say nigger in a social setting, or a black person checking into a hotel that says it has a vacancy, but when they show up to the desk, it's taken. Even if you don't experience that kind of stuff, the stereotype threat that you feel from people still has really profound effects. And we'll go into detail about what those are. We're going to define stereotype threat. And think about yourself. We want to draw this in and have you think about whether you've experienced this, because we found that we all had in different places. A stereotype threat happens when we kind of know what people might believe about us, our identity. So we work extra hard not to confirm that stereotype because we don't want any bad outcomes. So if you've ever felt a little uncomfortable in a group and you tried too hard, and you may have fallen flat on your face. Think of kids in junior high or high school who are stereotyped for being geeks or wimps, and what you or you know that may have gone through. The bishop gave us sort of an example of how Christianity's kind of been taken hostage in a stereotype. You ever been a little bit nervous about being seen as a Christian because you don't want to really be identified with that particular way Christianity is expressed? It happens to everybody, but we're pretty privileged, and we don't have too much fallout. Just think about a situation like this. This is a quote from a person that Dr. Steele interviewed. This is a kid walking through a nice neighborhood, could be Drake Park. As a black man, when I walk through a white neighborhood, people usually act nervous and even cross the street. But if I whistle classical music, and he actually mentioned that he whistled Vivaldi's Four Springs, you know what I mean. They relax, and they sometimes even smile at me. So what's the stereotype threat here? Anybody?
The hoodie.
Yeah, because who wears those?
Well, the people have been shot.
Yeah.
By the police.
And with a redheaded girl, would you worry?
No.
Because what's the other stereotype?
Black.
He's black. Yeah. So what did he do? What's that where I work to counter that stereotype so nothing bad will happen to me? What's he doing? Right, because we all know black people just don't really know a lot about classical music, right? We would be surprised. Any black young man that's whistling Vivaldi can't possibly be a threat. He's not one of those. I'm using really strong language on purpose to make a point. Okay, so here's our next really big lesson learned, and this is an important part of why we thought it'd be great to do this presentation is that we can carry some of these messages into our lives. and help change the way people think in our own, when we're in the right setting. The second big lesson was that data show that no matter how smart, how successful, how hard a person is, stereotype threat still sits on top of that person and causes them to have difficulty succeeding and performing the way some of us might just take for granted. And the whole business about just pull yourself up by your bootstraps is totally not true in terms of you won't have any problems in performing. And we'll show why later. We have a great quote from King that speaks to this. It's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man he should lift himself by his own bootstraps. It's even worse to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps when somebody is standing on the boot. It's not quite to our point, but we loved it, so we put it in here. And the third big lesson, and it goes back to us again too, but in a hopeful way, stereotype threat will affect everybody. We talked about some examples that could be in our own lives or families of origin even. You know, the golden child, the troubled child. Okay. This actually is Clinton and Obama, but we couldn't find a picture of Obama. Well, maybe they won't show. If I ask him about his background, will he think maybe I'm doubting his ability to afford this club? Have you ever been a little nervous about talking about race, gender issues, or other things because you thought, well, I could be seen like I might say something offensive, I'll get in some trouble. That's stereotype threat. And the data shows that it really inhibits people's ease in talking about race, and we'll find later that unless we actually sit with people and talk about their experience and let them be part of a group in a way that we lean into differences and talk about them in a educational and helpful way, we're really not going to get too much progress. So yeah, stereotype threat is bad on all fronts. So we're going to talk about sort of the technicalities of how it actually works. And all of this is from a lot of research that's been done, actually internationally. Here's a fact about it. You don't have to be susceptible. Person doesn't have to have a chip on their shoulder or a bad, personal history. Just knowing that it could happen to you is enough to trigger all the behaviors we're going to show that end up having you shoot yourself in the foot. And it's much more likely to happen if you care about your performance. Kids in school that don't care about school or are doing something really easy that doesn't take a lot of effort have less of it than if they're high performers who have gotten into Harvard or the first black person in a law firm who's trying to make partner. It's stronger the more you care about something, which is sort of unfortunate. And the other thing is, and this can come to thinking about our own community here in our own parish, it doesn't even have to be a direct threat. There are lots of cues in the world that studies have shown give people a sense that maybe I'm not going to fit in. So the Episcopal Church could conceivably, be an example of the first line. The people look pretty well off, and there are only 2 black people in this program I'm attending. Kids in high school, they live through this constantly. All the little kids at one place, all the other kids in them. I personally had experience where I went to work somewhere, it's like everybody's like under 25, and I definitely felt like I had to kind of show that I could use a computer. A common one, all these people are up talking at a big conference, and there's just no woman on the podium or in the leadership team. Seeing political or other kinds of this was a moral majority pamphlet in the lobby when you're interviewing, like you're kind of going, ooh, what's... So we can all think, and we will have some information. Yeah?
I just wanted to jump on one of those. I don't see any women on the leadership team. Had a conversation Friday, actually, during the rehearsal for the ordination. I was sitting next to Anna Carmichael, who's director of the church up in Hood River. And we looked at the bishops up there at the front, and there was Nettie, and there were all the other white guys. the old white guys up front. And Anna and I went over and talked to Michael Hahn afterwards. One of the issues in the Episcopal Church is there is still a glass ceiling, and women are not on an even playing field with men to be rectors of churches or to be bishops. And so Anna and I were talking about that. We went to Michael Hahn, who was the bishop's chaplain, canon for domestic mission or something. And we said, you know, wouldn't it, I know it's an extra burden, but there are women bishops. Wouldn't it be important for them to make an extra effort, though it costs them more to do so because they have to do it more often, to make sure that there's more than one woman up front at every ordination of every bishop? So that was, picking up on your point there, and I know some of the kinds of things you're talking about in the book, but that was one of the things that we did. Now, what will come of it, I don't know, but at least two of us went to Michael Hahn and said, shouldn't we be doing this in the church?
Okay, good for you. Yeah, because this'll give people a sense about, well, am I going to fit in this church? And we're going to give you an example of just how subtle it can be. This is our author, the PhD, Michael Steele, and he was the first black guy who was ever in the graduate program at the University of Ohio in social psychology. And he said, you know, the values and the quality and the stress on excellence in the program were inspiring, but they came in this package. And from his viewpoint as a solo black, it was kind of an all-white package. And so here are the things that he picked up on. Some of the features of being white academics, the preference for dressing down, because you can afford to dress down when you're already on top, right? You don't have to tie and suit. The love of all things European, not necessarily part of the American black culture. A preference for dry white wines. Little knowledge of black life or popular culture kind of got implicitly associated in his mind with the excellence that they talked about the program having. It seemed to have an identity that I didn't entirely have, and I kind of worried that I didn't get. This is a guy who's in a really good PhD program, not even an average person trying to go to college. So David's going to pick up here and talk about the section on what actually physiologically and behaviorally, mentally and emotionally happens to people when they're experiencing stereotype threats.
Well, their minds are preoccupied and distracted from the task at hand, and that's the chief message of the next series of slides. You spend mental energy being vigilant for and assessing potential stereotype threats. They feel self-doubt and their minds race with repetitive distractive thoughts about how warranted those doubts are. So you get what's called a reflexive spiral, where you go upwards in your thinking, which is draining all your attention from the thing that you're supposed to be doing at that time. I'm sure you're all familiar with this.
I am.
They engage in self-defeating over-efforting. They work very, very intensely, rigidly, and inefficiently. Self-monitor, checking and rechecking your work. This is about where stereotype is. You can see this more in people where it's a constant part of life, rather than the transient experiences that we introduced you to. Like, imagine if you felt like that all the time. Right? They develop physical and emotional symptoms. There's various different responses to it. You feel at risk, so you isolate yourself, and they don't feel that they can trust others to help them. Their working memory is impaired, chronically anxious and stressed. Heart rate and blood pressure go up, and we know that that is a pathology in groups in certain minority groups in the United States. That's what I said before. That is that you're spending so much inefficient time that you're not able to do the task at hand. So you therefore perform below your capability. physiological reaction. And once the performance suffers, a vicious cycle begins. So, so here's an example when a test was represented as one in which these were cute. You wonder how it got to know this stuff. These are experiments that are set up in social psychology. It's psychology, but it's not individual psychology. It's psychology as you're related to a group of people. But you can set up experiments where you change one variable at a time and see what the reaction of the chosen group actually is. Here's an example. If you give a cue where you say, I'm going to give you a test today, kids, and you preface it by saying, Asian kids tend to do better than whites, while white males with high math scores perform dramatically less well than similar white males to whom no such message was given. In other words, this queuing up, before you even get there, I'm going to give you a test to test your IQ. It sets this cycle off, and it produces an extremely negative. Low performance leads to concern and worsen. The stereotype threats. You get a vicious cycle, resulting in even higher efforts to improve, resulting in higher stress and anxiety that further hurts the performance. It negatively, in fact, impacts all these different things. Math, verbal, and language use, diplomacy, memory, golf putting for sure.
Hey, wait a minute. Why is that on the list?
For you, kid.
Oh, for me.
Well, you know about golf, right? I mean, it's like the thing where a million things can go wrong, and only Scotch Presbyterians could have invented it.
If you get in all aspects of your game,
Yeah.
and then you get up to the putter, and you don't think you're good at that, suddenly that cycle kicks.
Right. So, notice that, imagine people where their body presents and triggers off these things, right? They have to work overtime to blunt them. So, inside of your mind, as if these were little bubbles, you have to constantly say things. I may be black, but I'm not a drug addict. I may be a woman, but I can see you. Why aren't you seeing me? I'm not white trash. I don't like math. I take it she's supposed to be Asian. I'm not a terrorist. I'm not Mexican. I can't salsa. I can't swim. You're constantly batting these down, but notice the bad part of this. The very fact of batting them down means that you're presupposing all these categories. and they keep circulating around in the society. I wanted to say something about math. There is a very famous result that gets constantly circled for over 100 years about the famous 12 to 15 point difference in African American IQ scores. I can't tell you how often this keeps coming up and gets refuted. But the way this book refutes it is by putting this social psychology spin on it. No wonder, if you took the stereotype threats away, the result would disappear. Now, he claimed that they had done that, but there's not, the documentation of doing it was not extensively gone into in the book. It would be worth following up on. These are the people, that have been studied, where it affects them as groups.
Somewhere, yeah.
Black and white males, females, Latino Americans, tested some about third grade school, Asian Americans.
Is there anybody in the room that has thought of a time when you were probably living this stereotype threat in your life?
Yeah.
God, most of mine.
Everybody in our group had very compelling and still hurtful stories of when it had happened to them at some point.
I don't know of a hurtful story, but the thing that popped up to me that was so new was when it said third grade U.S. schoolgirls, and I'm thinking, that's about the time I realized that women were not valued like men were.
So, even Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, in her, I think it's in her autobiography, she said that when she arrived in the Supreme Court, she's the only woman, this is the point Jed was referring to about the bishops, she felt she didn't call it stereotype threat. She said that she was stressed, burdened with extra scrutiny, or she felt she was, pressured to be the Jackie Robinson of women of the law. Another current reference for us. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg showed up, she immediately dissipated. We became, she said, just 2 of 9 justices, and it was such a welcome change.
David, can I comment on that from
Yeah.
personal experience? Most of you know, only woman working as a civilian Navy submarine programs. And what I used to say to myself often was, if one of these guys mess up, there's a whole bunch of guys, probably nobody will even remember. But if I mess up, it is absolutely going to be remembered. And I kind of worked that process the whole time.
Did you check and recheck your work
And
to
for all
feel like you
those
had
that
2
follow
jobs,
you.
not just one?
Yes and no, not to that extent, but just that sense. Actually, I just basically kept trying to do it as well as I could and better, kind of thing.
Well, that's the point.
But that whole idea that I would be the one, I was the oddball in the meeting. So if I said something stupid,
Yep.
people
You kept
probably
your mouth
remember.
Just like a woman.
Can you think about all the physical and emotional energy that you put into
Absolutely,
the
absolutely.
price you pay?
Yeah.
And if your entire life were like that,
Yeah.
all the time, everywhere, no
Mhm.
matter.
Right. So if you're thinking, I really like to understand how minorities feel, especially black people. Just think about yourself and extend this and say, this happens like all the time, right? And then you'll understand. That's how we felt in the group. This gives you a sense of empathy that,
That's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
We weren't sure that would be clear.
All of us, it's very clear.
I thought she was over functioning.
Yeah, and she is overfunctioning. Yeah.
Burdened.
Marie's got,
Marie, you can address.
What can we do to reduce stereotype threats? So you've got a little half sheet. If you take a look at that, that is this slide. We can talk about that a little bit. Provide cues that diversity is desired and valued. When I arrive at an event, do I feel like I belong? What are the cues that tell me I do belong or I don't belong? Try to think of somebody else coming into an event, how are they feeling? So to give you an example, we've had times when it's so crowded in here that somebody like Carly is sitting in her wheelchair thinking, okay, there's no room for me. I can't get to the table. And then once I do get to the table with Derek and fill my plate, I can't maneuver to get to a place
It was a forced
to eat. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But that's just, that's just somebody coming in and saying, okay, what are the cues? Do I belong? Work to build a critical mass of diverse people. So just like Jed said, he went up and talked to somebody and said, wouldn't it be nice if we had more women bishops up there? Make a point of reaching out, be warm and available. Connect people to those with whom you feel they might relate. That was one of the things that Steele said. He had somebody, a white professor that he really connected with that helped him feel more comfortable in his program. And it didn't have to be another black person, but it was a professor that said, I know you can do this, we have high standards, I know you can meet them, and we'll work together, and that was really important. create opportunities for intergroup discussion. When I saw this, I thought about that Native American gentleman who came. He was a professor from Portland State. He was here a couple weeks ago at St. Helens. And what he kept stressing was we have to have a conversation. So we don't go in there and fix something that we think is the way to fix it. We have a conversation about how we work together to make it more like the kingdom of God, really, what Jed was talking, what Bishop Curry was saying, you know. How do we make this place the kingdom of God? Make the goal about mutual learning. At St. John's Episcopal Church in Jackson, where I came from, we had a counselor who did a Spanish class, and she had Spanish people from town and Caucasians, and we were all learning Spanish together and learning English together. And these, what was amazing was we would be given an assignment. So my assignment would be take these English phrases and translate them into Spanish. And they had the exact same thing, doing the opposite. And she paired us up, a Hispanic person with an Anglo, and we helped each other with our homework. That was amazing, because now I value you, you value me, and when I see you on the street, I say hello. You know, I have a connection. I have a bridge. So it's really, really pretty cool. Encourage people to tell their stories and seek to learn of their frustrations. The Catholic Church in Jackson, Wyoming, had they knew they had a big problem in the Hispanic population with abuse, and they wanted to help the women. So what they decided to do was share your food traditions. Teach us how to cook the Hispanic way. And so the women all came to the kitchen in the Catholic Church, the Anglo women, the Hispanic women, and they're cooking and they're talking and they're sharing their experiences. And somebody hears something and they say, why don't you go talk to this person? Why don't you go to this agency? They can help you. You know, that builds bridges. That's just amazing. Affirm your belief in people's value to the group. That's exactly what you're doing. You know, what you bring value, diversity brings value. It'd be really boring if everybody was the same. So how do you, you know, foster that and say, you know, I want to hear about your traditions. Show me how to cook. Teach me a few words in your language. It really makes a big difference. Then we have an example, a couple examples here in Trinity. Jeannie and Chris were working on a layout. How could we lay out the room so it's easier for people who have walkers and wheelchairs to maneuver around and feel comfortable? And we have some layouts that we're going to be sharing with people who are in charge of receptions. We had a problem with the lighting situation. Someone who's handicapped leaves an event. They go down this lift. They have to go through the sanctuary. It's pitch black. And there's no light switch by the door. So they're traveling through the sanctuary in the semi-dark to get out through the other door to go down the ramp. So Karen worked with a lighting team, and they came up with the idea of, we'll just leave a light on in there when we're open. So you come in now, there's a light on. It was so simple. It was just a little procedural thing, but it makes all the difference. I mean, it's really amazing when we put our thinking caps on. So that's my slide. Yeah. So, yeah.
Some of you have shared your experiences with Stereotype Threat. I'd like you to do a little bit more of that in terms of what you have heard today and your experiences. And particularly, I'd like you to focus on this last one, how we might, as a parish, use what we have learned today. So, does somebody want to get the discussion started? This is the time for us to talk with each other. Bart, thank you.
Some of you know I turned 58 a few weeks ago, which for a lot of you are like, psh. But I'm realizing that, I mean, seriously.
Nice.
Well, no. People have told me that. This is not a stereotype. People have said to me, that's nothing. I don't understand what you're so worked up about. And I'm realizing that what I'm worked up about, at least partially, is stereotypes about being old in my own head. And really trying to bend over backwards. Sometimes I was in a grad program a few years ago. Everybody else was in their 20s. And here I am in my mid-50s, and I worked so hard not to look old, to the point that I sometimes did not work as hard as I could have, just to prove that I wasn't this stodgy old teacher person. I mean, I'm hearing this in a really helpful way. So thank you.
Yeah, it's funny, Sandy and I had an experience just the other day, and we're reading the paper, and some people our age were referred to as elderly. And I was like, oh my goodness.
So what
We've
am I
got
gonna
another
do?
burden to carry around.
Well, and so do you bend over backwards sometimes to not
Not be
try
elderly.
not to be old?
But it never occurred to us that we might be elderly.
Yeah. So the age stereotyping is something that I'm kind of seeing.
I'll be glad to talk to her. I celebrated my 89th life.
So what happens is that my concerns got dismissed by several people. My feelings got dismissed because I'm not old. You're old. I mean, it was this kind of spiraling down, very complex thing that was going on, and it has to do with stereotypes in my head and in other people's.
I want to throw one in that may get me in lots of trouble. The bottom bullet. I think one of the things within the Diocese of Eastern Oregon that hinders us is the stereotyping between the parishes. I think Trinity has a stereotype, and I think we stereotype. So I have no good solution. I just want to bring it up.
Well, being completely insensitive to that subject, tell us what you think we're stereotyped as.
Oh, I think Trinity is stereotyped as the place with the money, the big church, we've got all the answers, that kind of thing. I'm sorry?
Kind of city versus country.
City versus country, lots of money, things like that. So that I think I'd like to think some more about the suggestions you made within that context, because maybe we can come
I
together.
think that another
Does that make
step
sense?
maybe for you, another step. How about we as Episcopalians?
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
The
yes,
frozen
absolutely.
chosen.
Huh? What
Frozen chosen.
The frozen chosen, yeah.
Well, when I was a Presbyterian, they said the same thing.
Oh, well, that's true. Presbyterians are good people.
Well, we have all these jokes about each other. I'm sorry. I know I feel regret that I.
The good Lutherans.
I'm wondering if we internally are curious enough, or if we just simply brush it aside, not to go where David was suggesting, if we get preoccupied with it,
Yeah.
we start doing this. But curiosity is an extremely important function in all this. Just trying to think of a good question. Somebody told me once, the answer is in the question. So how do we maintain that curiosity? How do we step up to what Bishop Curry said, saying, all right, you're the Episcopal division of the Jesus movement. And we go,
Oh, hell.
The Episcopal branch.
can we stay curious about what he is talking about? I think I know what he's talking about, but will we keep that conversation alive and keep asking questions? That's the thing.
How do we view ourselves as Episcopalians, and how others view us.
And do we give off cues that are welcoming, or do people worry about whether they fit in with us, maybe?
That depends on how curious we are. Really, when we engage, if we are curious, acknowledging the sensitivity to color that they might have. But as a white male, I am stereotyped by women.
You could be, yeah.
I am.
You are.
Okay, let's be.
Everybody does it to everybody these
Yes.
days. It's getting worse.
And how do we stay curious so that we guard against that? I mean, I'm looking for a mechanism or a cue that says, okay, stay curious.
I have noticed over the years, I don't know if anybody else has, but if we have someone come to church one Sunday that may look a little different than most of us, do they feel welcome? I've noticed, for example, that we have a huge population of homeless, mentally ill, lonesome people that come to Family Kitchen, but not one of them joins us.
Tommy does when.
Yeah.
Well, Tommy occasionally drops in for a cup of coffee.
Or food.
And he occasionally came to church years past, but he hasn't come. Okay. Oh, somebody's saying time.
We just want to be sure you guys see this. Betsy took this from over 2 pages down to 1, and it's a really great tool for if you're in a place where you feel like you're going to lean in and address something that was prejudiced, how to do it without, you've got a better chance of being successful apparently if you follow the 4 steps, and I know I need help with that.